Welcome back to Granja Caimito in the Pedroche Valley of Andalusia, Spain. It almost feels like spring. It is a sunny day, the temperatures have risen quite a bit. There is still no rain, but we can see a lot of flowers coming up, and it really feels nice. But then, only sun isn't really nice. Might be nice for a tourist, but if you depend on plants growing, then maybe not so. So sunny days with an occasional shower is much nicer.
These new plants are coming up in between the spent straw compost that we used to cover the broad bean seeds. So that seems to be started by now. The temperatures are rising. The nights are still very cold, single digit in centigrade. But during the day there's quite a bit of sunshine. What we don't get is rain, so this has to work with what is stored beneath the spent straw and in it. But it is coming up, and hopefully we get a little bit of rain, and even if it's just a few drops to refresh, but at least it's a start. Of course the whole area is still looking like that, so if you don't look closely you don't see anything that is emerging, but like I said, it just started. And if there were rain, the swale would be full by now. But as we had almost nothing, it's just dry. The integrated pond here in this swale continues to hold water. There's clay below, and it's not evaporating because the sun is not hot enough. But last year, by the same time, this would have been full. And it isn't. So that's a problem. So this is the swale in CT2, the one where we use the water pump down at the outflow of the water reservoir, that creek that flows by our land where we have a shallow well. And we pump the water up here to fill the swale to compensate for the lack of rain. Because in other years this swale would have been filled by now. And this is an experiment. Does cost us nothing. We can empty that well and nobody will suffer. And the electricity of it is free, comes from the sun. The pump is there anyway, so we can as well put it to use and see what will happen. So I will now go along this swale and see what I can find. I have an expression that now after several days of running this pump, whenever there is enough sun, it has filled quite a bit, but it's not as full that the water would come to the beginning of it. The bottom of the swale is not absolutely equal, so there are some lower parts, and of course the water level has to rise above them so that it flows further along. In the case of rain that would be no problem because it's there to catch it all, but when you try to pump it full, then of course you can see these things. And of course some of it is also infiltrating and is finding its way, as it should, further down slope. And that is why we are doing it. This also has an integrated pond area, and you can see a little bit the level or the elevation of the ground So we dug this a little bit deeper than the rest of the swale in order to hold water for longer, so that there's something. And as the bottom is clay, it stays. Not a lot of evaporation. And the idea is that once we have trees on that berm, the palovnias, and maybe some other things, they might be able to reach this water and make then use of it for longer during summer. That is one of the ideas. So based on my memory how it looked like a few days ago, it has filled up quite a bit more. Of course I don't have the images with me now. Later when I edit this video I can then compare. But I think the level has risen. But then of course it's a lot of volume, given the length of the whole thing. To be notable, it requires quite a bit of water. And this bump here will eventually be overflown. But of course that needs to rise quite a bit more. So until it starts overflowing here, I think we need at least 5 centimeters more. And given the length, like I said, that's a lot of water. During a rain event, that would be no issue, because the water enters this equally on all sides. But right now it is being filled up just from one end, and that of course requires a lot more volume to fill this slightly higher area. For a swale it's not a problem, but in our current application it is notable. But it doesn't really matter. What I don't see is any of the broad beans. Maybe here and there is a few, but the cow attacks and the frost and all this seems to have eliminated the things that we seeded here earlier on. So we need to reseed, and we have a few bags of green manure that we want to put out here, but doesn't matter if there is no rain. So we have to wait until we are very sure that actually there will be rain, and then the day before we can seed that, so that during spring something green is growing here and it adds roots, living roots, to this material, so that it turns into soil. Because the purpose of this berm is, and that is why it is so flat and spread out, to become some sort of a garden. Of course I don't know yet what exactly we are going to put here. And the palovnia trees in the middle of the berm, they are supposed to provide shade and additional biomass. Let's hope that these guys will resprout now that the temperatures are higher. I think they will. And then maybe we can have here Mediterranean aromatics, or even some traditional vegetables. It depends on what we are needing by them. So this is something where I expect the next major step to happen in 2 years. And right now it's all about creating some biomass, so that we have soil where something then actually can grow in. And yes, it is deep. This is not very shallow. If I had some rubber boots I would try it and show you, but my leather boots are not for that. But I would think that this could almost be, well, half of knee deep, maybe a little bit more. So it's not that shallow. And over there it continues to be filled up, because I can hear the water flow. So this is not so bad. This here is another section that is a little bit higher, and it has filled up, so it is not an obstacle anymore. And you can see that there's almost no flow, which which is why it is now, or it has leveled out. So now it is about bringing up the level overall, so that eventually it will then overflow the higher ground further down, and then it will fill up that pond area. So we will leave this going as long as our pump in the shallow well down there at the creek is giving us water, and when the water level in the well has reached the low point, the pump will shut off, and then it will be replenished by natural processes, and then the pump turns on again. So that way we are redirecting this water. We're not taking it away, because eventually it will all be united again further down. So if I pan the camera a little bit, so our creek down there at the entrance is basically in that direction, and our slope here falls down in that very same direction. So over time, every drop here might end up there, unless it has been turned by a plant into a plant body together with the oxygen. Not with the oxygen, with the carbon that's in the air. And then, of course, that produces oxygen, photosynthesis. So we're not taking it away, we're just putting it to good use. And nobody downstream is dependent on it, because there is nobody downstream, and eventually this outflow goes into a nearby river that I actually should visit someday. It's not that far away, and from there it just flows further down until it ends up in the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, that is. Of course, that is pretty far away, but what I'm trying to say is nobody depends on this water. So this is just doing a good thing and no harm to anyone. And I was speaking earlier about the Palovnias resprouting. This one is. I don't have a tripod, so it shakes a little bit. Let's hope. So there you can see it. So it has begun. This is the area where we used to train the pigs on the electric fence, and we had the giant cabbage in here, and also some turnips. So with the exception of the giant cabbage, it was all leftover seed. We have not started this pig project yet, because the other area where we want to have them after they have been trained on the fence in here is not ready, and other things are more important at the moment, especially finishing all the temporary paddocks so that we have something to play with. So this area is basically has been neglected, and the stuff there around the sprinkler kind of died. It is more in sunlight than the things that are further to the left. This is still there and it's going, or at least it's alive. Lots of other things have shown up. There is no intention at the moment to do something here, because as long as there's living roots, the soil improves, and maybe later we can use this area, while there are no pigs in it, to actually plant something. When we tried to seed the giant cabbage, we used a cultivator, so the thing with an engine that moves the soil and cuts it into little pieces. And this machine had a very hard time. The soil was not really soil, it was very, very hard and compacted, despite the fact that we put in about 5 tons of straw. So that is an indication of how bad the situation is. But by now it seems to be improving. So if we were to use this machine now, probably it would be a little bit easier, thanks to all the roots that have developed. But we will leave this task to the pigs once they come, and then you will see. So I just wanted to give you a little update what has happened here, and that is what has happened, not much. And I'm a little bit scouting on this sunny day where we can continue with our grazing. This area has been on hold for a while. Lack of rain, low temperatures does not help the grass grow. And now that the temperatures are a bit higher, it looks like this grass has started to grow. And maybe in a week, so by the end of this week that is starting, it is Sunday now, maybe we can bring them in here. We call this area A20, and it has 51 days since the last grazing event. And you might be able to see that here in the straw something has shown up. Let me give you a close-up here. I assume that is all the cereal that the straw has been made from. Well, not actually made, but that is the same plant like the straw itself. And we have quite a few patches where this is going. We have seen a lot of time now without rain. The temperatures have been rising during the day, but in the night it was still cold, single digit, and even some frost early morning. And so today we had the cows here in this area, which we call A15, and I'm about to have a look how it looks after the grazing event. The Cynodon-dactylon, the Bermuda grass, is still dormant, it's still grey. It is simply too cold for it. It thrives at 35 degrees centigrade, and we are definitely not there yet. That is for the summer. But it will start to green up by the end of spring. And in the meantime it looks like that, except there is other grasses for the cold season in between. So this is A15 after grazing. We had a lot of the mustard flowers here. There are still some left. If I pan to this area here the cows were not so much interested in them. But in the most part it has all been grazed off very well. It looks pretty even by now. So this is a positive thing. And these open empty areas that we had here, they seem to be less. It looks like the soil armor in the form of grasses and other plants is coming along well. Because I remember that this area used to be much more open. So this is a very positive sign. So that is helpful. It is looking much better. There is rain in the forecast. Now it says that from tomorrow on we might expect some rain. And it is supposed to last 3 days. Let's hope that is actually the case. Looks like after a good meal of grass, everybody is now relaxing to process all the good food they had. The calves have jumped into this paddock, and that's not a big problem for the calves and neither for the paddock. This is not ready for grazing, but in the case of the calves that is absolutely no problem. They don't do any damage to the soil restoration process, but they try a little bit on the grass because soon that is their diet when they have been weaned from their mothers. The issue with that is that it's possible because they can jump between the wires of the fence, and if they are fast enough they will not be shocked, and therefore they do that. Once they grow up a little bit, then they learn that they cannot do this anymore, and then the problem goes away. But it's a lot better to have some control over the animal movement. It doesn't have to be very perfect. Of course, eventually all this will be pig-safe fencing, and that means it's a physical fence with some electrical elements, but it's not something you just install out of the blue. This is not like building a factory, so we need to go slow and do things based on actual need. And of course it's also an economic consideration. So this here is pretty interesting. Of course all of this in here in CT1 is in pretty bad shape because of the pigs and because it had no grasses or forage or pasture to start with, but something is coming up again. So a little bit of seed was left in the seed bank, and the interesting thing is that it happens right here. And if I pan around here to the other side where this gully or funnel is, you can see that where the water used to flow, or when there is rain and there's a little bit of accumulation of water, these areas are still apparently more moist, and therefore we do see some grasses coming up. And it's actually better grasses than what was there before for some interesting reason. So there's a little bit of a green strip here, and that is quite interesting. So once we get around to do some earthworks here, now it will be over summer, we need to take this into account. Let's go and have a look at the swale there, whether it has filled up more or the water is infiltrating, which would be also good. That is what we want eventually. It doesn't look that much different than from before. It has to rise up quite a bit in order to get over this bump here, because this area is a little bit higher than the rest of the swale further down. And of course now with the shade, there are some clouds. The pump isn't as powerful as when there is full sun on it. And I think also the water level in that shallow well has lowered quite a bit because of our pumping whole day long. But then there's rain in the forecast, and hopefully after the rain this will then look much different. We will see on Monday. And Monday is now 4 days away. I think you can see by the different color that the moisture is going up into the berm. So that is a good sign. It is working as intended. as there has been only sporadic rain here in this area and spring is approaching, we kind of fear that we might end up with lack of water to keep all the things alive that we want to keep alive. So we have a water reservoir nearby, and we happen to have a shallow well, not a deep well. It is very shallow. It's only about a few meters deep, not 100-meter deep well. Nobody drilled this. It's basically a cavern in the ground where groundwater then accumulates. And we have this shallow well next to the outflow of the water reservoir. So it does receive constantly some water that the water reservoir does not hold. And this pipe here pumps water from down there up into the swale to basically simulate the rain. And that is what we try to do in order to keep the berm of this moist and also help the areas below it where during spring we want to plant something in order to establish more forage. And in order to keep this water, instead of letting it flow away, we are redirecting it to this place. It will find eventually its way all the way back to the creek where it came from, but we are redirecting it in order to substitute the rain. Same way as in other places, we have some volunteer plants show up. That also must be from the seed that is contained in the straw, and it managed to germinate and is growing. And it has at least the time until the next grazing event, or in this area when we bring in the mules and prepare the area for seeding a mix of different plants. So this always happens when we use the straw and we distribute it. We get those plants. It's a cereal, it's an annual, but every root counts. This here in CT1, the integrated pond, continues to keep its level. The sun is not too hot, so not much is evaporating, and as the clay bottom keeps it there, it just stays. But of course we do need some rain. Here you can see the difference. So to the left, that is the bottom of the swale, which is dry, and then you see to the right the water level of the integrated pond, and there is quite a difference. By now, this would have been completely filled, but we did not get that rain yet. Maybe it will come. Here on the other side of the swale in CT1 there's a similar picture, but this integrated pond area is not as deep as the other one. It's more like a wider swale, but you can see that the water continues to stay here. The cows also like the acorns, and that is what she's trying to find. I guess there are none left, but she's trying.
That was it for today. I leave you now with some impressions of the aromatic plants that we have in the now excluded area, and some view over the distance towards the autonomous region Castilla-La Mancha. They still speak Spanish there. Not always the case in autonomous regions in Spain.